Hey, and welcome to the Fifth Line Show with Colby Guy and Alex Baumgartner there to my right. So we've had an interesting week in Pantherland. We've had three preseason games since we've last talked, I believe. We're on preseason game number 6 now. That just finished yesterday, but we've had our final cuts. We got the first game with the what could be the full lineup minus Alexander Barkov, who was out with an illness. So we have a lot to talk about. How's it going, Alex?
Not bad, as Colby mentioned last time we were here. We said we'll talk one more time this preseason. 3 games have gone by since we've gone through some roster cuts. There's still 35 on the roster right now, I believe. We were expecting around 28, but a couple more guys than we first expected. But we're going to have one more preseason game tomorrow in Tampa. Then maybe there'll be a couple more cuts before the last preseason game. And then we're going to get into the 23-man active roster. Panthers played yesterday against the Lightning in Orlando. They fielded a lot of their NHL players. Panthers really didn't have a great game, but it was also the second time that most of those guys have played in the preseason. The first time the two split groups came together after the cuts. So a little bit of rust was kind of expected, not looking too much into preseason, stuff like that. But we are going to talk about today are who's going to get the final spots, who's going to make it to the 23-man active roster. Quickly, some housekeeping. Lucas Carlson, Jerry Mayhew, and Rasmus Asplund all got sent down. The latest wave of cuts and had to pass through waivers. All three of them did. A little bit surprised on Lucas Carlson, but guys have been slipping through waivers so far. There's a couple more spots. I actually wrote an article about that today, which we're going to talk about where the spots are left for the active roster or opening night roster.
Yeah, and then a few injuries happened that did open some things up. Most notably, Grigory Denisenko has been dealing with something since last Friday's preseason game where he missed it. He was a game time decision. They had to rush Wilmer Skoog up from his hotel to jump in for him. And since then, he has not been at practice. He's been at the IR skate. And it looks like he's almost lost his job to Mackie Samoskevich, too. So that's an interesting thing to look at. Is he going to be a guy that ends up being a healthy scratch every night? Are the Panthers going to try to send him down to Charlotte? Is he going to get claimed, or does he have a chance of getting his job back?
Yeah, so I did about 1,600 words on just the forwards because I realized the defense would take up another 800 words based off of what I was doing. But the top 9 battle, because right now I'm plugging Nick Cousins in the 4th line just for this opening night roster, which I think would be a smart move. He did play line 2 last year in the playoffs and started the first preseason game with Kachuk and Bennett, but Maurice slid him back down to give Samoskevich a chance on that second line. I think Mackie's been great. He's been one of the better players that's played the full slate of preseason games for the Panthers. 3 goals, I believe it's 2 or 3 assists, leading the Panthers preseason squad in points. Samoskevich looks like he's an NHL player. Offensively, 100%. The speed, the back checking, obviously the scoring ability. There were a couple defensive mishaps that was seen in the couple games, but that's what happens when you have a rookie, a 20-year-old adjusting to NHL game speed, and it's the preseason. I think Mackie should be slotted right now in the top 9. And Colby mentioned Denisenko. I don't think Florida is going to want to send Denisenko down and hope he clears waivers because they did give him that 2-year prove-it deal contract, and they did play him last year in the Stanley Cup final in 1 game. And I think that has a little bit of we kind of believe in this guy and we want to see where it goes. But how do you take Mackie Samoskevich out of the lineup right now? He's played himself from maybe he's a bubble guy just because he's waiver exempt and we can send him down to Charlotte and get meaningful minutes. Dang, how do we keep this talent out of our lineup? And I think that's where I stand right now. If Denisenko's healthy by the time opening night's around, maybe you keep him there as a scratch and then work him in because he also missed the preseason basically. What do you think on that, Colby?
Yeah, and I mean, I want to say about Mackie Samoskevich is for a 20-year-old kid, this guy is really good with neutral zone reads. He threads a lot of really good passes off the wall there to create some rushes in the zone. He knows when to dump it in. I have not seen that many mistakes in the neutral zone from Mackie Samoskevich, and that's somewhere that takes a little bit more development to be able to make the right decisions in that area where everything's so confined and whatnot. But his defense also, I've seen some flashes out of him where he'd make some incredible plays as well. I mean, when you look at all three zones, I think this kid's ready to be in the NHL. But looking at Grigory Denisenko, before he got hurt, he just didn't really show much. He got the chance to play on a line with Sasha Barkov in the preseason opener there, and he did not show a whole lot on that line. His camp was kind of mediocre. So maybe you keep him as an extra forward if you don't mind throwing one of those other players that can slot in on the fourth line through waivers. But I don't know. I mean, looking at some of these guys who have cleared waivers, like a Jacob Bernard Docker or Lucas Carlson, I mean, there also is a good chance he just doesn't get claimed as well. So
Now
we'll
the
have to see
one
what the philosophy is with Denisenko, and there's always the chance he starts the season on IR too, because the extent of what he's dealing with isn't known, but it was originally stated to just be back tightness. So maybe he'll be back with the group for the last preseason game. So we'll have to see.
Now there, I have a good theory on why a lot of guys have been clearing waivers. Excuse me, and that's because when you go through waivers, if you get picked up by another team, you have to spend, I think it's 30 days minimum on their NHL active roster. I think it's 30, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have peep in the midst of the preseason and you're making active cuts to your team and you might be sending down guys that you might have wanted on the team, you had good looks at in training camp, and you're bringing in someone new, someone that's not necessarily proven, then maybe we're just going to let them go through waivers. And that's where I can understand, because you're basically giving up one roster spot to someone you don't know if it's actually going to be able to play on your team, and they have to be on that active roster. So that's why right now I think more guys are slipping through waivers, and maybe that's why we saw Lucas Carlson, who was very good in the AHL last year, slip by. What do you think on that?
Yeah, and I think it's also just the sheer fact that so many other teams are putting guys on waivers, and you have to worry about who you're cutting from your team as well. So I think maybe those claims don't happen until that last week where
Yeah.
you're kind of deciding on your final roster, and you have a guy like Josh Mahura who was put on waivers, and you're looking at your team like, you know what, maybe this guy could be better than the guys who made our team.
Yeah, the last second waiver send downs is probably where you're to see some of the better claims, because now you have more of an idea of where you have your roster, where you want your roster, and someone that's really good, you're like, well, I can definitely sacrifice my 6 or 7 or 8 for this guy because he's definitely going to be my 6. And that's what we saw with Josh Mahura last year. And he's going to be one of the top 5 on the Panthers on the back end. We talked about Mackie. We talked about Denisenko. Those are guys I'm looking at in the top 9. As Colby mentioned, there's a couple guys battling for a fourth line spot that also may have to go clear through waivers. And I think one of them, if he does get sent down, will probably get picked up. But I have him making my team if he continues the way he's played. I think my guy for making that fourth line center role is Steven Lorentz.
Yeah, that's who I have taken that fourth line center role too. He's just been so good on both sides of the ice. Maybe not a guy who lights the score sheet up, but he's a very heavy forechecker, and he fits what you kind of want from a center on a line with Ryan Lomberg and Nick Cousins. And that's a guy that isn't afraid to throw the body, crashes the net hard, gets the puck in deep, and agitates the heck out of guys for that when that time the fourth line is out there. And he's a guy that plays some really good defense. He's a guy that can be on your penalty kill. And during that first preseason game, he was on the I guess what would be the first penalty kill unit alongside Etulo Shireen in there, and those two did a pretty good job together. So I think he's a guy that you definitely want to take a look at as your fourth line center. I mean, Kevin Stenlin has been pretty decent too. He's also a heavy forechecker, big guy, throws the body hard. But I think Lorentz is just a lot better on the defensive end and would really help the penalty kill, which had a lot of issues last season. So I think that's a guy that could really end up helping the Panthers this year.
You have three guys that are still there that are fighting for that spot. Now, I just don't think I've seen enough from Alex True for him to slot over Stenlin or Lorentz on my list. And I also think out of the three, the one that would pass through waivers at a higher chance would be True when you send him down. Lorentz, Stenlin, and True are all not waiver exempt. So you send them down, they'll have to pass through waivers. I don't think they're going to, even if Lorentz somehow doesn't make that fourth line center role, I still think he'd be the 13th forward because I don't think they're going to risk sending him down because, as Colby mentioned, he can kill penalties. He's a big body. He can skate. He has some silent hands, and I think Stenlin is very good hands around the net too. But for me, the biggest thing is he plays hard. And when you look at his career breakdown in the NHL, this guy lays the body, specifically last year in San Jose. I mean, he has more hits than he has games played in the NHL. I think it's like 247 to 190 something. I mean, this guy can hit. He has some speed. He can play on the penalty kill, and he's going to bring something that the fourth line didn't necessarily have last year, where it's a 6'5" guy on skates that is a good package for what you need on that line with Ryan Lomberg, Nick Cousins, Zach Dalpe, if he's there, whoever you throw on that fourth line.
I mean, I will also say that combination of Nick Cousins, Ryan Lomberg, and Steven Lorentz might be one of the funniest lines in the NHL. They're always cracking jokes. Even Lorentz, a new guy. The moment I walk in there, I'm wearing an FGCU shirt for the first time. I see him in the Panthers locker room. He's making jokes. Ever since, every time I see him, he's making a joke. He's just a fun guy in that room. And to go along with Nick Cousins, who is a notoriously funny guy, and Ryan Lomberg, one of the better personalities on the team as well, I think you're getting a lot of chirps out of that line.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that's a sneaky good fourth line. It's like I don't think any fourth line in the NHL is just like blowing you out of the water because you're not putting necessarily high skilled guys on that line. You're putting guys that are hardworking, have some silent skill, and will get the job done in the 10, 11 minutes they play. And that's what we've seen in Ryan Lomberg's career in South Florida. We saw it with Nick Cousins being able to jump up the lineup and go back down. So I think that as we talked about in the last show, the Panthers have a good problem, but a problem in deciding who's the 12th forward, the 13th forward, who's the 7th defenseman. If you're going to carry three goalies or if you put Knight in the AHL to get some games in and keep Stolarz up, I mean, there's a lot of thinking they're going to have to do before the roster cuts are final.
Yeah, and I mean, another guy who's putting himself in the conversation for a fourth line role or a 13th forward role at least is Will Lockwood. I mean, he's a small guy, throws the body around a lot, plays pretty big, holds onto the puck pretty well. I don't think he's going to make the top 12, especially with Mackie Samoskevich being a guy that can keep up with those top 9 guys and probably will end up winning that battle. But if you see a situation where Nick Cousins bumps up back to the second line and need a fourth line winger, maybe Will Lockwood takes that, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, in that article, I did put Will Lockwood as a depth forward. I mentioned 3. I said that I could probably see Zach Dalpe just sticking along as a 13th forward. It would make sense just because Maurice does have trust in him and he knows the system and he meshes in with the locker room. I had Will Lockwood as I put it, sneaky good guy to have as an in-season call-up because I think this is a guy that's still going to be underrated, so he can probably slip through waivers pretty easily unless a team has strictly been scouting the Panthers. So while I don't have him as my 13th forward, I did mention him as a guy that was very impressive in the preseason, plays a lot bigger than he is, has touch around the net, and would be good if you need to throw someone in the fourth line.
Yeah, that forward core kind of looks like one of the deepest forward cores the Panthers have had in the last few years. I mean, factoring in the fourth line is better than the one they had during their Stanley Cup run, and that third line is almost comparable now to what it was when they won the President's Trophy in the year before.
It's comparable to that line you had with Marchman and Reinhart, which was one of the best third lines in hockey. And this line might be even better because Luostarinen is really effective defensively.
Yeah, and then you have Tkachuk on the second line with Barca or with Bennett and Samoskevich, and that might be better than the 9-1-1 line. It might not be. It
Well,
it
that
really
that
depends on
whole
what you get
President's
out of
Trophy
Samoskevich.
season was just offensively something that we haven't seen. They set like every NHL 2000s record in for scoring. But I agree to your point. The depth and the way that the team plays this forward group is probably the best you're going to see you've seen from the Panthers. It's just everything meshes well together. The third line, Reinhart, Lundell, Luostarinen, their chemistry is off the charts, and that's not a third line. You could slot them as a second line on on a lot of NHL teams, and people wouldn't bat an eye. That's how good the depth is in the top nine.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to set the scoring records again because this is a much different system. But as far as the way they play, I think this is a lineup that can go further in the playoffs, play better in the playoffs, and is just overall deeper than the one they had. Especially looking at the first line they rolled with for the majority of the season. They had Verhaeghe and Barkov, and then they'd rotate a bunch of different guys on that line. Like for a good chunk of the season, Maxime Mammon was playing on that line. So,
and now you have Evan Rodriguez, who is traditionally extremely good with elite franchise centers, and they stick him with Barkov, and I mean, he just looks good on the Panthers. He just kind of fits what they need for that first line.
yeah, and I mean, you have a guy like Barkov who plays so well at Speedy Snipers, and now you got another one with him. I know Duclair was there for the stretch run of the season, but now you have two Speedy Snipers next to him for the entire season, which would be very comparable to what that line was when it was Verhaeghe, Barkov, Duclair. But now you got it healthy to start the season, and that's going to help a lot. And you also got the nice defensive depth forward in Steven Lorentz in that trade that allowed the Panthers to sign Evan Rodriguez. So that Duclair trade kind of opened up an avenue for the Panthers to add even more depth there.
I think the forward battle, even though we mentioned a lot of names, I think when it's all said and done, it's going to be very similar to what we just said. You and me both agree. We probably see Mackie up there. The health of Denisenko, I still think he's going to be with the team and he won't be in the AHL, the whole waiver situation, and if they want to play that roulette game. But I think Lorentz will be that fourth line center, and that's going to be your 12 forwards for opening night. The defense is a little bit different because I think we all pretty much have the first five defensemen locked in. It's the six, and who's going to be the six? Is it going to be Mike Riley? Is it going to be Matt Kiersted? Is it going to be John Ludwig? Is it going to be Casey Fitzgerald? I think those are the four that are in contention right now.
I mean, I think it's pretty cut and dry for me. I think it's going to be Mike Riley. I mean, this is a guy they brought in because I knew he fits the system. I think they trust him with that role. And from what I've seen from his camp, I think he's a guy that can really settle into that role and do well in it. Casey Fitzgerald isn't a guy that's shown me enough to be able to shoulder that role. I think he's going to be a fine seventh defenseman, or he'll probably go through waivers and go to Charlotte, but he just has not shown me enough. Kierstead will compete for it, but I think Mike Riley is a guy that can play the right side and has played the right side before, while Kierstead has been used mainly on the left. So I think that might be something that shades him to be the seventh defenseman. But I think we're looking at Mike Riley here as the sixth defenseman, and the rest of the pairings are pretty set in stone at this point as well.
Yeah, when I was looking through it, I just thought putting Riley on the power play to start the preseason just to see what he does. He looked very solid in the times that he was out there. I agree with you. I haven't necessarily seen too much from Casey Fitzgerald, not just in the preseason, but last year. He kind of just jumped in as a seventh defenseman, didn't do too much wrong, but also didn't do that much to impress. The Tampa preseason game, he was throwing the body a little bit. He was getting feisty. He was fighting. He was making a physical impression. But in terms of what they need for that sixth defenseman, I think Mike Riley will be the guy. And as for the seventh, I'm kind of leaning towards Kierstead.
Yeah, but I think as far as workload goes and accepting that role, I think Fitzgerald is a guy that has experience taking that role and could just end up being the seventh defenseman if the Panthers do feel like Matt Kierstead can go through waivers, especially because of the lack of right-handed defensemen. But I think that's just the way things are going to go. I mean, I have also liked John Ludwig's preseason, but he's a guy that hasn't played as many games going into this preseason after having some injury troubles, and he's a guy that can go through waivers as well.
And that's
So I
important.
think the right decision probably would be to send him to Charlotte to start, but he is a guy that maybe halfway through the season, if things are still rough on the defense aspect of it, because you're going to be getting Ekblad and Montour back, I think he might be a guy that can get a look at some point.
Yeah, you're going to
But
have, as you said, you're going to have guys that can go through waivers, that they're still at camp and they're still doing well at camp and preseason. I think Justin Sordiff has had a pretty decent camp and a pretty decent preseason, but he's going to go to Charlotte. He's going to play meaningful minutes down there, and he's going to come back to next training camp even stronger, or maybe if something happened, you can bring him up and bring him down. So some of these waiver guys that are still here at camp, they're going to go down to Charlotte, or waiver exempt guys. They're going to go to Charlotte. They're going to be able to come back if there's an injury. You never know. But as we said, the depth isn't a problem with the Panthers.
yeah, and Justin Sordiff has had a really good camp, and I think if someone in the top 9 goes down for a little bit, I think Justin Sordiff will get his chance to
He's going to
get
be a good
called up,
player.
and he'll be a pretty good player.
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of went through everything. Talked about the top 9, talked about the fourth line, we talked about the extra forwards. Quickly touched on the D. I don't think there's too much to look into in the goaltending. It's going to be either they carry 3 or they don't. I don't think they're going to send Stolarz down through waivers. There's no point in doing that. They brought him in for a reason. So if they carry 3, they carry 3.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with the goalies after these next 2 preseason games, and then we'll reconvene once the cuts are made, and we're sitting here again the day before the season opener. Next Wednesday is going to be our next show. So by the time we sit back down for that, we'll know everything. We'll have all the guys who went through waivers, who were claimed on waivers, or anything else, and we'll be sitting here the day before regular season hockey is going to be played for the
Yeah, the
Florida
day
Panthers.
before Colby guy's birthday.
Yeah, that too. But it'll be the day before regular season hockey starts for the Panthers. We'll have a few regular season NHL games that have happened as well. So we're getting back in the thick of things. We're on our last show before the start of the NHL regular season. It's
Yeah,
an
but make sure you
exciting
guys
time.
stay tuned because we are going to have some guests. Not going to say who, but we do have some beat reporters that will be joining us throughout the coming months on the show. We have one confirmed that you guys are going to enjoy that may or may not be talking about one of those position battles that we quickly touched on. So, Colby, take it away.
Yeah, guys. So appreciate you guys joining us today. If you guys want to follow our Twitters, mine is at Colby D Guy. Alex's is at A Baumgartner, and our show's Twitter account is at FifthLine5R. You can find my work at Florida Hockey Now. Alex is back at 5reasonsports.com. And I appreciate you guys reading. I appreciate you guys listening to this. I also appreciate if you listen, if you read my work too. That's good too. I appreciate you guys listening to this and watching this. And I hope you have a good day.